Our story begins in the majestic Persian Empire, a vast kingdom stretching from India to Ethiopia. Under the rule of King Xerxes, the Jewish people lived as exiles, far from their homeland, trying to maintain their faith in a foreign world. In the capital city of Susa, amidst the towering walls and opulent palaces, lived a young Jewish woman named Esther, an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther's life, though humble, was about to take an unexpected turn. Known for her beauty, grace, and quiet strength, she had no idea that destiny was calling her to a place of great influence, a place where her courage would be tested like never before. King Xerxes was the most powerful ruler in the world, known for his wealth and extravagance. To showcase his empire's greatness, Xerxes hosted a lavish banquet that lasted 180 days. As the final week of feasting drew to a close, the king, fueled by wine and pride, summoned his queen, Vashti, commanding her to display her beauty before his guests. In a shocking act of defiance, Queen Vashti refused the king's order. Her refusal sent waves of shock and anger through the kingdom. Humiliated before his court, Xerxes deposed Vashti, stripping her of her crown. Now, the throne was empty, and the search for a new queen began, a search that would change the fate of the Jewish people forever. Among the many beautiful women brought to the royal palace for the king's consideration was Esther. Though she had never sought the throne, her life was now entangled with the destiny of Persia's greatest kingdom. But her path to the crown wasn't just a story of beauty. It was a story of hidden identity, courage, and the unseen hand of Providence working behind the scenes. Esther's rise to power would demand more than elegance. It would require immense bravery. Soon, she would face a deadly plot that threatened her life and the lives of her people. Her faith, courage, and wisdom would be the key to their survival. Stay with us as we embark on the journey of Esther, the woman who dared to stand up for her people, even at the risk of her own life. Queen Vashti's fall and Esther's rise. After Queen Vashti's stunning refusal to obey King Xerxes' command, the Persian Empire was left in turmoil. Vashti, once celebrated for her beauty and grace, had dared to defy the king in front of his royal court, an act that no one had anticipated. Angered and humiliated, Xerxes sought the counsel of his advisors, who warned him that Vashti's disobedience could inspire rebellion among the women of the empire. They advised the king that swift action was necessary to preserve his authority. Taking their advice, King Xerxes issued a royal decree, stripping Vashti of her title as queen. Her banishment was a statement to the entire empire. Disobedience would not be tolerated. But with Vashti's fall, the royal throne was left empty, and so began a search across all 127 provinces for a new queen. A search for a woman whose beauty, grace, and obedience would secure the king's favor. A royal proclamation went out, summoning the most beautiful young virgins from across the empire to come before the king. The palace, usually reserved for the nobility, now became a gathering place for young women from all corners of Persia. Among these chosen women was Esther, a young Jewish orphan, raised by her wise and devout cousin Mordecai. Esther's life had been simple, far removed from the extravagance of the royal court. But now, she was thrust into a world of luxury, competition, and politics. Mordecai, always watchful, had given Esther important advice. She must keep her Jewish identity a secret. The Persians knew little about the Jews living among them, and revealing her background could put her at risk. Trusting her cousin's wisdom, Esther entered the palace with her true identity hidden. As Esther, whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, arrived at the royal harem, she was placed in the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the women. Haggai was an important figure, responsible for preparing the young women for their presentation to the king. Yet from the moment he met Esther, Haggai sensed something different about her. Beyond her physical beauty, there was a humility and grace that set her apart from the others. She didn't seek the throne for herself, and that sincerity earned her Haggai's favor. Esther received special treatment, better quarters, the finest beauty products, and 7 handmaidens to attend to her every need. For an entire year, Esther and the other women went through rigorous beauty treatments, their skin anointed with oils, their hair perfumed, and their bodies clothed in the finest fabrics. Each woman was preparing for her one night with the king, a single opportunity to make a lasting impression and win his heart. As the months passed, the palace buzzed with rumors. Who would capture the king's attention? Who would rise to wear the royal crown? Many of the women, intoxicated by the thought of power and prestige, lavished themselves with extravagant jewelry and perfumes, hoping to dazzle the king. But Esther's beauty was different. It radiated from within. She wore no lavish adornments, no excessive perfumes. Her character, humility, and quiet strength were her true ornaments. Finally, the day arrived when Esther was to be presented to King Xerxes. Her heart pounded as she approached the throne. Would the king see her as just another face among the many? Or would he recognize the qualities that set her apart? The moment Esther entered the king's presence, she captured his attention. Xerxes was immediately struck by her beauty, but it was more than just her appearance that moved him. There was a calmness in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that drew him in. Unlike the other women, Esther didn't seek to impress through extravagance. Instead, she let her grace and wisdom speak for themselves. King Xerxes was captivated. He placed the royal crown on Esther's head, choosing her to be his queen. In that moment, Esther, the humble Jewish girl raised in exile, became the queen of Persia. But even as she ascended to this position of power, she knew that her greatest challenge still lay ahead. Esther kept her Jewish identity hidden, just as Mordecai had advised. For now, her secret was safe, but the danger was looming. While Esther adjusted to life as queen, her cousin Mordecai remained a watchful guardian at the king's gate. He had raised Esther with wisdom, and now he kept a close eye on the happenings within the palace. One day, Mordecai overheard two of the king's officers, Bigthana and Teresh, plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. Horrified by the discovery, Mordecai quickly sent word to Esther. Without hesitation, Esther reported the plot to the king, crediting Mordecai for uncovering the treachery. The king's guards immediately investigated, and the conspirators were caught, tried, and executed. The king's life had been saved, and the act of loyalty was recorded in the royal chronicles. But Mordecai received no reward for his actions, and the incident seemed to pass unnoticed. Little did anyone know that this moment would play a critical role in the unfolding events that would soon threaten the entire Jewish people. Esther's life in the palace continued, but a new danger was beginning to rise in the empire, one that would soon force her to make an impossible choice. Her secret Jewish identity, which had been hidden for so long, would soon need to be revealed. Esther's courage would be tested, not in a battle for the throne, but in a battle to save her people from certain destruction. Unbeknownst to Esther, the very forces of evil were aligning against the Jewish people. The rise of Queen Esther was no accident. She had been placed in the palace for a purpose greater than she could yet understand. The fate of an entire nation rested on her shoulders, and soon she would be called to act. The threat of Haman. While Queen Esther settled into her new role in the Persian court, a dark shadow began to loom over the kingdom. A man named Haman, an Agagite, had recently risen to a position of immense power. King Xerxes had promoted Haman above all other nobles, making him the highest-ranking official in the empire. As a symbol of this power, all the royal officials were required to bow down and pay homage to Haman wherever he went. Haman's arrogance grew with each passing day, and he relished in the deference shown to him by the people of the empire. However, there was one man who refused to bow before him, Mordecai, the cousin of Queen Esther. Mordecai's faith as a Jew prohibited him from bowing in worship or reverence to anyone but God. Day after day, Haman passed by the king's gate where Mordecai sat, and each time, Mordecai stood firm, refusing to bow. Haman's anger began to boil. His pride was wounded by Mordecai's defiance, and soon it consumed him. But for Haman, it wasn't enough to simply punish Mordecai. His rage spread beyond one man. He wanted to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews. In his twisted mind, the defiance of one Jew became the crime of the entire Jewish nation, and he would stop at nothing until they were wiped out from the Persian Empire. Fueled by his hatred, Haman devised a sinister plan. He approached King Xerxes, carefully hiding his true intentions behind a mask of loyalty. "There's a certain people," Haman began, "dispersed among the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." Haman painted the Jewish people as a threat to the empire, a group that refused to conform and posed a danger to the king's rule. He then made his proposal. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to cover the cost. King Xerxes, trusting Haman and blinded by his own ambitions, handed over his signet ring, the symbol of royal authority. With this ring, Haman could seal any decree in the king's name. The plan was set in motion. Haman issued a decree across the empire, ordering the extermination of all Jews, men, women, and children, on a single day. The date was chosen by casting lots, a practice known as Purim. The lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. On that day, the Jewish people would be annihilated, and their enemies would be free to plunder their possessions. The news spread quickly throughout the empire, sending shockwaves of fear and confusion among the Jewish population. The city of Susa, normally bustling with life, was bewildered and silent. The Jewish people, who had lived peacefully among their neighbors, now faced an unspeakable threat: genocide. Yet as Haman celebrated his perceived victory, the seeds of his own downfall were already being sown. When Mordecai learned of the decree, his heart broke. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. He knew that the lives of his people were in grave danger, and only one person in the kingdom had the power to change the course of events: Queen Esther. Mordecai sent word to Esther, explaining the full extent of the plot and urging her to intervene. "Go to the king's presence," he pleaded, "and beg for mercy and plead with him for your people." But Esther faced a dilemma. Though she was queen, even she could not approach the king without being summoned. The penalty for entering the king's inner court uninvited was death, unless the king extended his golden scepter to spare her life. Esther had not been summoned to see the king for 30 days, and the risk was too great. Yet Mordecai's response was both profound and prophetic. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape," he warned. "For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Mordecai's words resonated deeply with Esther. She realized that her position as queen was no accident, and that her moment of destiny had arrived. She was the only one who could stand in the gap for her people, and if she failed to act, the consequences would be catastrophic. Summoning all the courage she could muster, Esther sent word back to Mordecai, asking him to gather all the Jews in Susa for 3 days of fasting and prayer. "I will go to the king, even though it is against the law," she declared. "And if I perish, I perish." The tension in the palace was palpable as Esther prepared for the most dangerous moment of her life. She donned her royal robes and stood in the inner court, just beyond the sight of the king. Would he extend his scepter, sparing her life? Or would this be the end of Esther's courageous stand? Meanwhile, Haman, oblivious to Esther's Jewish identity and the growing resistance, continued to revel in his power. His hatred for Mordecai had only intensified, and he plotted to have a gallows built, 50 cubits high, on which to hang Mordecai. Haman's plan was now twofold: destroy Mordecai first, then carry out his larger plan of annihilating the Jews. The day of reckoning was drawing near, and Haman believed victory was within his grasp. But he had gravely underestimated the power of a queen's courage and the hand of divine intervention that was already at work behind the scenes. Stay with us as we uncover the dramatic turn of events that would soon unfold, leading to the fall of Haman and the salvation of the Jewish people through Esther's bravery. Esther's moment of courage. 3 days had passed since Queen Esther made her fateful decision. 3 days of fasting and prayer, where the Jewish people of Susa, along with Esther and her attendants, sought divine intervention. The fate of an entire nation rested on the shoulders of one woman. The weight of her decision was heavy, but Esther knew that this was her moment of destiny. She had been placed in the palace for such a time as this. As the 3rd day dawned, Esther prepared herself to face the king. The law was clear. Anyone who approached King Xerxes without being summoned would face death unless the king extended his golden scepter. It had been over a month since Esther was last called into the king's presence, and no one knew how he would react. Would her beauty and favor still be enough to save her life? And more importantly, would they be enough to save her people? Esther adorned herself in her royal robes, a symbol of her authority as queen, but also a reminder of the risk she was taking. Each step she took toward the inner court felt heavier than the last. As she approached the entrance to the king's hall, her heart pounded. She was about to gamble with her life, with no certainty of the outcome. King Xerxes sat on his royal throne, conducting the affairs of the empire. As Esther appeared in the doorway, the entire court held its breath. Would the king show favor to her, or would this be the moment that sealed her doom? Time seemed to stand still as the king looked up and saw his queen standing there, uninvited. But to Esther's great relief, Xerxes was pleased to see her. He extended the golden scepter in her direction, sparing her life and granting her permission to speak. With a deep breath, Esther stepped forward and touched the tip of the scepter. Her heart was racing, but the first step had been a success. "What is it, Queen Esther?" Xerxes asked, his curiosity piqued. "What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." Esther knew that this moment was delicate. She could not yet reveal her true request. Instead, she calmly invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared for them that evening. Xerxes, intrigued by his queen's unusual request, agreed to attend. Haman, too, was delighted by the invitation, unaware that the banquet would be the stage for his downfall. As the evening arrived, Esther hosted the banquet with grace and composure. King Xerxes and Haman sat at her table, enjoying the lavish feast. Once again, the king asked Esther what she desired, offering her anything she wished, even up to half his kingdom. But Esther, knowing that the timing still wasn't right, invited them to another banquet the following evening, where she promised to reveal her petition. Haman left the banquet in high spirits. Being the only guest invited to dine with the king and queen filled him with pride. But his joy quickly turned to rage as he passed by Mordecai at the king's gate. Once again, Mordecai refused to bow before him, and Haman's fury reignited. He couldn't bear the sight of Mordecai any longer. At the suggestion of his wife, Zeresh, and his friends, Haman ordered the construction of a massive gallows, 50 cubits high, where he planned to have Mordecai hanged the very next day. Little did Haman know that the wheels of justice were already turning against him. That night, as Haman plotted Mordecai's demise, King Xerxes couldn't sleep. Restless, he ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him. As the records were recited, Xerxes was reminded of the time when Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate him. Mordecai's loyalty had saved the king's life, yet no reward had ever been given for this noble act. The king, struck by this oversight, decided that it was time to honor Mordecai. Early the next morning, Haman arrived at the palace to request Mordecai's execution. But before he could speak, the king summoned him with a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Assuming that the king was referring to him, Haman suggested an elaborate display of royal favor, dressing the man in one of the king's robes, placing him on the king's horse, and parading him through the streets with a nobleman proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." To Haman's horror, King Xerxes commanded him to carry out these honors for none other than Mordecai, the man he despised. Haman, humiliated and furious, was forced to lead Mordecai through the streets of Susa, proclaiming his honor for all to see. The very man Haman sought to destroy was now being exalted. After the humiliating ordeal, Haman rushed home in grief, but there was little time to sulk. He was immediately summoned to Esther's second banquet with the king. As Haman entered the banquet hall, he had no idea that the walls were closing in around him. As the banquet progressed, King Xerxes once again asked Esther to make her request. This time, Esther knew the moment had arrived. She took a deep breath and spoke with conviction, revealing her true identity and the threat against her people. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king, shocked by her words, demanded to know who would dare threaten his queen and her people. "The adversary and enemy," Esther declared, is this vile Haman." Haman's face turned pale with terror. The king, enraged, stormed out into the palace garden, unable to process the betrayal that had unfolded before him. Haman, realizing that his life was now in danger, threw himself at Esther's feet, begging for mercy. Just as the king returned, he saw Haman collapsing onto the couch where Esther was seated. Infuriated, Xerxes accused Haman of attempting to assault the queen in his very presence. At that moment, the king's guards stepped forward and covered Haman's face, sealing his fate. One of the king's eunuchs, Harbona, pointed out the gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai, and Xerxes immediately commanded that Haman be hanged on it. In a twist of fate, Haman met his end on the very gallows he had intended for Mordecai. As Haman's body hung from the gallows, the king's fury subsided. Esther had risked everything, her life, her position, and her future, to save her people, and she had succeeded. But the battle was not yet over. The decree to annihilate the Jews still stood, and now Esther would have to plead with the king to revoke it. Stay with us as we reveal the final battle for the survival of the Jewish people and the remarkable legacy of Esther's courage. The Jewish victory and the legacy of Purim. With Haman's death, one of the gravest threats to the Jewish people had been eliminated. But Queen Esther's mission was not yet complete. The decree that Haman had sealed with the king's signet ring, ordering the annihilation of all Jews across the Persian Empire, was still in place. According to Persian law, even the king himself could not revoke an edict once it had been decreed. The day of destruction, the 13th day of the 12th month, was fast approaching, and the Jewish people still faced certain death unless something was done. Esther once again prepared herself to approach King Xerxes, this time with an even greater request. She needed him to allow the Jews to defend themselves against the attack that Haman had set in motion. Falling at the king's feet, Esther wept and begged for her people's lives. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman devised to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces." Moved by Esther's courage and determination, Xerxes extended his golden scepter to her once more. He granted her permission to write a new decree in the king's name, using his signet ring to seal it. Mordecai, now elevated to a position of great power within the empire, set to work drafting the new decree. The new edict granted the Jewish people the right to assemble, defend themselves, and destroy any force that might attack them, including women and children. It also allowed the Jews to plunder the property of their enemies, just as Haman's decree had initially allowed their enemies to do to them. The decree was sent out quickly, carried by mounted couriers to all 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. As the couriers raced across the empire, the mood among the Jewish people shifted from despair to hope. They now had the legal right to defend themselves, and they would not be taken by surprise. In every city, town, and village, the Jews prepared for battle, determined to protect their families and their lives. When the fateful day arrived, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the enemies of the Jews gathered, expecting an easy victory. But they were met with fierce resistance. The Jewish people, united and determined, stood their ground and fought back with the strength of a people who knew they had no other choice. Their survival was at stake, and they fought with courage and resilience. In the capital city of Susa, the battle was especially intense. The Jews killed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman, who had sought to carry on their father's wicked legacy. But despite their victory, Esther knew that the threat had not been fully eliminated. She approached King Xerxes once again, asking for permission to extend the decree for one more day in the citadel of Susa, to ensure that the enemies of the Jews would be completely vanquished. The king granted her request, and on the next day, the Jews of Susa killed another 300 men, bringing peace to the capital. Throughout the provinces of Persia, the story was much the same. The Jewish people defended themselves against those who sought to destroy them, and by the end of the day, they had achieved a decisive victory. In total, 75,000 of their enemies were killed, but the Jews did not lay a hand on the plunder, choosing instead to focus on their survival and the preservation of their people. The Jewish people, once facing complete annihilation, now found themselves victorious and free from the threat that had loomed over them for so long. In the days that followed, there was great joy and celebration throughout the empire. The Jews had been delivered from destruction, and their enemies had been defeated. Mordecai, who had risen from obscurity to become the second most powerful man in the empire, sent letters to all the Jewish communities, instructing them to celebrate this great victory every year on the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. Thus, the festival of Purim was established, named after the pur, or lot, that Haman had cast to determine the day of the Jews' destruction. But instead of mourning, it became a time of rejoicing, feasting, and giving gifts to one another and to the poor. The Jewish people were reminded that even in the face of overwhelming odds, faith and courage could lead to miraculous deliverance. The celebration of Purim was not just about remembering the victory of one battle, but about remembering that God's providence is always at work, even when the situation seems darkest. It was a reminder that one person's bravery, Esther's willingness to risk her life for her people, could change the course of history. And it was a reminder that God's people would never be abandoned, no matter how dire the circumstances. Year after year, generation after generation, the Jewish people have continued to celebrate Purim, remembering the courage of Esther, the wisdom of Mordecai, and the justice that was brought to their enemies. The festival is marked by joy, storytelling, and the reading of the Book of Esther, which recounts the events that led to the salvation of the Jewish people. It serves as a lasting testament to the power of faith, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, deliverance can come. As we reflect on the legacy of Esther, we see a powerful message that resonates even today. Her story teaches us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in the face of it. Esther could have remained silent, safe within the walls of the palace, but she chose to speak out, risking everything to save her people. Her bravery, her faith, and her determination are an inspiration to us all. The story of Esther and the festival of Purim remind us that no matter the challenges we face, there is always hope. Whether we are standing up for justice, defending the oppressed, or simply seeking to make the world a better place, Esther's legacy encourages us to act with courage and faith, knowing that our actions, no matter how small, can have a profound impact. Stay with us as we conclude this incredible journey through the life of Queen Esther, a woman whose courage saved a nation and whose legacy continues to inspire millions. As we come to the end of this incredible story, we are left with the profound legacy of Queen Esther. She was more than just a queen. She was a symbol of courage, faith, and the power of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming danger. Esther's journey from an orphaned Jewish girl to the Queen of Persia was not an accident. It was a part of a divine plan. Her willingness to risk her life for her people transformed the fate of an entire nation and established a story of hope that continues to inspire millions today. The story of Esther and the festival of Purim are reminders that no matter how difficult or dark the circumstances, there is always a path forward. Esther's bravery serves as a testament to the strength that can be found when we act with faith and trust in something greater than ourselves. She didn't shy away from the challenges, even when the odds were stacked against her. She acted with courage, not knowing if her actions would succeed, but trusting that she had been placed in her position for a reason. The lessons from Esther's story extend far beyond her time. Today, we face our own challenges, whether they be personal, societal, or global. Esther reminds us that our actions, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem, can make a profound difference. It is a story of hope, of standing up for justice, and of trusting that we all have a role to play in making the world a better place. If you've been moved by this story, consider how you can take action in your own life. Is there a cause that calls for your courage? Is there a situation where your voice is needed? Esther's story shows us that we don't have to be in positions of great power to make an impact. All we need is the faith to step forward and act when the moment arises. If you found this video inspiring, please share it with your friends and family. Let's spread the message of Esther's bravery and the hope that her story brings to so many. Your support helps keep these stories alive and accessible to all. By subscribing to our channel, you'll be the first to hear more stories of faith, courage, and hope from the Bible. And if you'd like to take your support further, consider joining our community on Patreon, where your contributions help us create full-length Bible films that bring these powerful stories to life for families around the world. We believe in the power of storytelling to change lives, and we couldn't do it without your help. Together, we can continue to spread the message of hope and faith that stories like Esther's offer. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of this mission. Until next time, remember, no matter what challenges you face, there is always hope. And sometimes the most significant change comes from those who are willing to step forward with courage. Just like Queen Esther.